Robert Ray is about to join me, former Whitewater independent counsel and member of the president's impeachment defense team. Great to see you today, Robert. I want to start with something that Nancy Pelosi said, because I know you're familiar with the case against Roger Stone and how the law works, obviously. How is it exactly a national security risk what the president has chosen to do by commuting his sentence? Just break it down for us.
You'd have to assume that there was some underlying crime that was committed other than a process crime. And I don't mean to suggest, Harris, that perjury, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and false statements are not serious. They are. And I think that in part explains why the president did not pardon Roger Stone. He just commuted his sentence. But nonetheless, you know, the point of an investigation is to apply pressure, sometimes using just process crimes, but to obtain information from someone like Roger Stone that constitutes something other than a process crime. The point, though, is that what Republicans have been saying all along, what President Trump in particular has been saying, is that this was an investigation that began under an erroneous premise that what was to be found here was Russia collusion. And Roger Stone didn't have any information with regard to Russia collusion, so they prosecuted him nonetheless and tried to apply pressure in order to get him to cooperate. And he didn't have anything to cooperate against the president. So, you know, in a nutshell, Nancy Pelosi's premise is in error. It presupposes that Roger Stone had evidence of Russia collusion, and he didn't.
Interesting. You know, I want to take a look at how other presidents and their choices, President Trump's predecessors, when it comes to granting commutations in particular. And so far, he's issued 11. Former President Barack Obama commuted the sentences for more than 1,700 people. Robert, what do you say about this comparison?
Crocodile tears. I mean, I'm familiar with pardons going all the way back to President Bill Clinton. And I prosecuted a number of cases that were process crimes, again, for the purpose of trying to get at other information that was potentially available. And every president issues pardons, and the pardon power is designed to deal with situations like this when you get close to the president's people, and sometimes there's overreaching. So, you know, the fact of the matter is that both Robert Mueller and Donald Trump can be right about this, and the Attorney General as well. I think they felt that what Roger Stone did was a problem, but the president has exercised his commutation power in order to extend mercy and to absolve Roger Stone, not of the conviction, but so that he doesn't have to serve a sentence.
Right. You know, you brought up Bob Mueller, and previous to you coming on with me was our reporter, Kristen Fisher, and she told us this. I'll revisit. Senate Judiciary Chair Lindsey Graham says he'll grant the Democrats' request now to have former special counsel Robert Mueller testify after he defended his Russia investigation in that op-ed that he wrote over the weekend. Here's House Intel Chair Adam Schiff reacting.
Call me skeptical about Lindsey Graham's motivations. After all, this is the guy who just, even before the commutation was announced, said that he thought it was a perfectly good idea. I suspect that all Lindsey Graham wants to do is continue his counterfactual, counter-narrative, that is, that Donald Trump was somehow the victim.
You know, Robert, before I come to you with a question, I'll just make this comment. When you hear Adam Schiff there, it's almost like the Democrats don't want to take a yes, you can have that test. Yes, you can have Bob Mueller. What are they looking for here just in general from both sides of the aisle? What do you think we'll learn from Bob Mueller?
Look, I think Senator Lindsey Graham, I'm more than happy to have Bob Mueller testify before the Senate. And if it doesn't go any better than it did with regard to the last time that Bob Mueller appeared, I suspect that's a good day in this political environment for the Republicans. So I don't see that the Democrats are all that anxious to shore up Bob Mueller. And as far as Adam Schiff's concerned about a counterfactual narrative, that's a disparaging comment. But the truth of it is if that counterfactual narrative is actually supported by facts, namely that the Mueller investigation did not really have a premise to work off of in order to do damage both to Roger Stone and, more significantly, to General Flynn, then that investigation has a lot of explaining to do, and frankly would be, in the end, I think, supportive of the president's position all along that something like this should never happen to another presidential campaign or president ever again.
All right, one last topic with you today. We've had a lot to get to, and I appreciate your patience. The Wall Street Journal editorial board is urging the president to pardon former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, saying it's time for the president to end this highly politicized prosecution. So this would be very different from what would happen or what just happened with Roger Stone commuting his sentence. This is a full pardon.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be necessary. And generally speaking, presidents are reluctant to step in and exercise their pardon power if that would be, essentially academic. I do believe that the courts ultimately will do the right thing here. I know it's taken a long time and everybody's patience has been exhausted, but I do not think the judge stepping into the middle of this thing yet again is going to be able to displace the right of the Department of Justice to end a prosecution. And I believe, if he doesn't do it voluntarily, I believe that the Court of Appeals will step in and do it for him.
Yeah, I know when you and I have talked previously, when this has come up with that particular judge, you have said, look, you may see a delayed process, but you never thought that judge even had, and I'm just quoting you to you now, even had what it would take to stop this legally, completely. Your last final thought.
Yeah, I don't believe that he does. Now, the en banc court of the D.C. Circuit, which is the intermediate level appellate court, may have something to say differently. That would surprise me enormously. But I think, look, we live in a country in which there's separation of powers. The power to prosecute or not prosecute resides exclusively with the executive branch. Judges should not be in those waters, period.
Robert Ray, great to see you. Thank you very much.